Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here today. My name is Tushar Patel. I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at Clio. I promise you that I'm not going to be talking to you about AI because that would not be the right thing for me to be doing. All right. So today we have a phenomenal subject matter expert on the topic. And so we're going to be walking through how your organization can leverage AI to power growth and profitability, how we are thinking about AI here at Clio, how we're looking at putting AI into the product and platform, but also just some educational resources here in terms of what we're seeing. One of the beauties of Clio is because we sit in the middle of the supply chain, we have the opportunity to speak to so many different organizations, right? Everybody from manufacturers and food processors to 3PLs and carriers, all the way through to distributors and wholesalers. And so we have the advantage of seeing how AI is being leveraged across a variety of different, industries, obviously all related to the supply chain. And so John Thielens is going to talk a little bit about that. But before I do that, a couple of housekeeping items because we always get asked. So number one, we are not in a duplex mode here, so you can scream at the top of your lungs, get all of your aggression and stress out, and you can yell at John and I, and we would not hear it, and we would not have any hurt feelings. So feel free to go do that. So you are muted, which means you have to get a little bit interactive and click on that mouse button if you have any questions. You should see a Q&A button there. Zoom always does updates on their UI, so it may be to the left, it may be to the right. I don't exactly know where it is. Maybe a little question mark with a bubble inside of a bubble there. Hit that Q&A button if you have any questions throughout, and we will get to the questions at the end there, so I can see all the questions that pop up. Other folks, you can't see the questions, so if you have a question, type it in. My rule of thumb is if you have a question, there's probably somebody else who also has the same exact question. So no question is too simplistic, no question is too complex. If we can answer it and we have the time to get to it, we will. If not, the questions are recorded. And so what we can do is we can follow back up with you. Somebody on the Clio team can do that. And then last but not least, we are being recorded, as I mentioned. So we will share this recording along with the slides afterwards, right? So that's not cue for you to drop off right now, but that is cue for you to know that you can share this presentation and you'll be able to share this with your colleagues as well, and you'll be able to refer back to it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is probably all you hear from me until the Q&A session. And with that, I'd love to bring up Mr. John Thielens to the stage here. So John, for those of you that don't know, is our Chief Technology Officer. I love hanging out with John. John and I live on opposite sides of the coast. I'm on the West Coast, he's on the East Coast. So we don't get to spend too much face-to-face time together. But whenever we do, I always learn something, and John always has these, subtle jokes and always makes me laugh. So it's always an enjoyable conversation, but also an educational conversation. So pay attention because he's quick and he's very witty. And so with that, John, I am going to pass it to you. Welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Tushar. And you see we're like separated at birth. We both got the quarter zip white T memo. So Clio uniform, here we are. So let's just dive in and get started. So we don't take much time out of your day. And I'll start with kind of the TLDR. So AI, growth, profitability. My main takeaway is all your years of experience. I've got a lot of years of experience. Some people that don't have many years of experience. All your intuition and your experience, it's all wrong. Everything's irrelevant. AI sort of changes the game. That means we have to continually question ourselves, question our ability to estimate what's possible, what's impossible, and how long it's going to take and what it's going to cost. All that experience is just way off kilter now. So constantly challenge yourself when it comes to the growth side or the profitability side. And my second big point here is your job description is not what you think it is. If you're a developer, maybe you are still a developer. If you're a business analyst, maybe you're still a business analyst. But what you do, your day-to-day activities, when you're complemented by AI or using AI-powered tools, it's going to be different. There's still a role for the human. We're not yet to Terminator, Skynet 2000, whatever it is. Hopefully that day won't come. But we have to figure out how to fit into the new ecosystem so that we can achieve the kind of possibilities that are unlocked by AI. Okay, so challenge what you're thinking, think about your job description differently, and let's then talk about growth and profitability. Now, when I was in school, we didn't have AP tests for microeconomics, but I took an economics class, and this is what I remember: that if you want to be profitable, you got to take in more money than you spend. And so when we talk about growth and profitability, there's a revenue side. How are we going to make more money in whatever business we're in, and how's AI going to help us grow? But also, how is AI going to help us reduce expenses, become more efficient, whether that's people expense or infrastructure expense or raw material expense? How's that all going to work out? So we're going to kind of look at both of these. And in fact, when at Clio, when we study AI, especially because we're a technology vendor, we have an additional kind of dimension. It's not just growth and profitability, but how can we, like you, I hope, figure out how to use AI to run our business more efficiently? Can Tushar use AI to find new customers more efficiently, more accurately? Can we use AI to do better pricing or manage our back office more efficiently, or do more targeted hiring, or get a better deal with our health insurance? All those are AI things that any company would have to do. Sometimes I call that the potato chip factory. That every company's got a potato chip factory, regardless of the business you're in. Even if you're making potato chips, you got to run the business. You got to buy raw materials. You got to come up with a pricing. You got to find distribution channels. You got to find new customers. You got to take care of me, and all that kind of stuff, right? So everybody's got to run the business, and then whatever business you're in, you got to do that too. Now it turns out the business we're in is delivering technology, and so it's important to us that we also include AI capabilities and AI power capabilities into the product that we give to you, so that you, when you're on the left-hand side of the arrow, can view Clio as a part of your AI strategy for how you're going to move your business forward. Okay, so we've got growth, profitability, inside and outside, different dimensions of AI. So let me kind of start with the cost part, because AI just isn't free. Now, we use Amazon. I could come up with a similar chart for Google or for Azure, but let me just focus on Amazon, because look, in my next life, I'm going to be Jeff Bezos, because he just can't lose money. No matter what you do, Amazon's got to get a cut. But what I want to point out here is that these are the costs through Amazon Bedrock. That's their Amazon framework for kind of driving LLM-based solutions, large language model-based solutions. And you can see huge pricing differences between these different models. The currency of large language models is tokens, the fragments of text, and so there's a whole algorithm there. But you can see these up in the upper left-hand corner, Amazon Nova Micro. That's an Amazon-owned, built, kind of smallish language model, and it's a lot of zeros after the dollar sign, as opposed to some famous ones you might have heard of, like Claude, where there aren't that many zeros after the decimal point, right? So huge difference in cost per token, and so we have to very much consider, what's the right AI tool, especially these are generative AI, large language model tools. What's going to be the right tool to serve the purpose? And what we've discovered in our experimentation is, depending on what you're trying to do, the more expensive model doesn't necessarily give the better result. So you need some kind of an approach that allows you to test out different ideas with different models behind, so that you come up with the sort of the right cost benefit model, so you can manage. You're trying to push costs down, but as you put AI in, it's going to drive your cost up, right? Because remember, Jeff Bezos can't lose. So how are we going to manage where we're saving money and how much we're spending on saving money on that cost line? So keep all of this in mind. There's another dimension of cost, which is risk. And all of you, like we do, we buy cyber security insurance, and so your insurance rates, which depend partially on your risk posture, are a material cost. It's actual cost. And if I start doing things that using AI that look riskier to the underwriter, then that's going to cost me more in premiums. Let alone if I ever have some kind of a disaster and I have to pay out, and my policy has to pay out. So I found this from IBM. And they say, look, if you have a data breach, and remember in AI, you're slinging data around into these language models, you got to make sure you have all the right security perimeters in place. And if you sling it in the wrong place, I think this is a conservative estimate. They say $4.4 million per incident, per breach. Now, and maybe they're right that these numbers are coming down. Feels low to me. On my desk, I've got probably a stack of free credit monitoring reports, because it seems like every month somebody leaks my information. So we're becoming somewhat inured to this whole data breach thing, but it's real, right? So we got to think about as we bring AI, again, moving data around, that we don't want to introduce more risk to the business. Okay, so that's one thing. The next thing I want to kind of get to though is, well, how does AI work? Now, so when we talk about AI, I think usually we're talking about, at least these days, the new stuff is generative AI. These, GPT, the generative predictive transformers. And these are things that they go out and they learn how to speak, typically English, but learn how to speak languages based, and they sort of predict what's going to come next. And it seems kind of simple that they could do as much as they can do with that research. But the other part of AI, I think it's increased awareness just on classic machine learning, just typical kind of, the velocity models, the kind of AI where my Amazon device, I better not say her name, she'll interrupt my presentation, and she wants me to buy more potato chips or whatever it is, because she's just looking at my purchasing patterns. That's not generative AI. That's just classic machine learning. And that's the same kind of thing, though. You study a body of data, a corpus of data, you build a model, and then you use the model to generate insights. And this can apply to classic machine learning, or it also applies to the way the large language models are developed. But I thought this is interesting too. So, we imagine that the large language models, they know how to speak English, and they seem to also know lots of other things. And they do hallucinate. But I found this off of my favorite AI research tool, which is LinkedIn. That when they study where the data that's training the models comes from, it's mostly from these Anglophone sort of places. But you can see it's not the whole world, is it? And very heavy weighted toward US, Canada, Australia, and UK. So it's not as broad as you might think it is, but as we start to contract with the providers of these large language models, there is kind of a quid pro quo if you're using a free model where they're going to train on the questions that you ask. And that becomes more data to sort of feed the beast on the training side. And that can be an unintended data leak vector. So you need to make sure that even when you're doing experimentation, train your folks who are on the research end of your business, that you need to be buying them some kind of a plan so that you get the right kind of data privacy guarantees. Otherwise, they'll be doing sales proposals and all kind of pricing information, and then the robot's going to learn. So be really careful with that. All right, but here's what I want to get to is we're going to build new stuff, and whether this is building new stuff on the growth side because I'm bringing new products to market, or I'm automating things and I'm bringing my expense side down, I need to do agentic development. Now, I mean, I'm sure all of us, if this were a live room, we could all raise our hands. Who's played with ChatGPT and asked it questions, and besides, what's the capital of Japan, it'll know. But that's only this little bit here. Here, there's a large language model. I go to chatgpt.com and I can talk to an and what fun is it? When we start about using these tools to build enterprise capabilities, it's way more than a chatbot. And it turns out that you need to be able to hook into your agent. So the agent is the interface, let's say, with the human. So here's the human over here. And the agent then is talking to the human. It understands from the LLM what the human is saying and how to speak back. So it knows English, okay? But it's also been trained up. So the agent is built to a specific purpose. It's not just a raw vanilla ChatGPT. It knows something. It knows if it's Claude, maybe it knows how to write code. Maybe if it's doing, invoice reconciliation, it knows something about invoices and finances. You've trained it with more stuff. So you have to train it with additional data sources. This is the resource augmented generation, or RAG. So you can train the agent with extra stuff beyond what the LLM knows. You can also expose tools so the agent can do stuff other than answer back to the human. And so the word you'll see, and I'll show you a little bit more about it, is MCP, the Model Context Protocol, which is an envelope for exposing tools to agents in an interoperable way. So you've got tools then. You have instructions that you use to train with these data sources, and then you usually have some kind of framework to manage all this nonsense, because this becomes essentially software. Now, you haven't gone off and written a Python program. It's not your classical kind of programming, but it is assembly of parts, and there's a life cycle and governance around all of this stuff. So that this agent can get smarter and smarter, and as you learn things about how it's supposed to work, you can improve it over time. That means you need to think about an agent development lifecycle, like a software development lifecycle, and come up with the right kind of tooling to surround it. The other interesting thing about this is, we're trying to get agents to do stuff autonomously, but we don't trust them completely. I mean, hallucination is the famous word, right? When ChatGPT first came out, almost 3 years ago to the day. or the became famous when it got to the ChatGPT 3, that it was famous for making wrong guesses. And so sometimes we need to be able to engineer as much automation as possible, but then get a human in the loop as well. And so there are frameworks that allow us to train the agent using some kind of evaluation tool, perhaps, which can be another AI watching the AI to decide when the agent's response isn't reliable and we need to ask the human for confirmation, or we need to ask the human for help. So this is why the human becomes part of the design of the entire workflow for an agentic solution. So it's a lot more than a chatbot, and there's a whole lot of technology to get your arms around to understand how this works. So who's the human? This is some old material from the old Clio days. We like to think about who's engaging with our software in terms of a persona. This is a classic user experience modeling technique. For example, we have two different developer personas, and we try to target our product to deal with this. So a classic IT developer was Daphne, and Daphne in the old days would write Python code, Java code, whatever. She's writing code. And over here, Ivan, the IT integrator, is more at the business level. So he doesn't have to write code, but he understands the structure of an invoice or of a shipment manifest. And these complex documents, he understands that stuff and can weave it together into a business process. So you have these different layers. I believe both of these people still exist. It's just that how Daphne works with AI, with an AI assistant, is quite different. And what she's building it out of might be quite different. And what Ivan is doing at the business process level is quite different. But that domain expertise still applies. So there's still a role for the human, but the job description is going to shift. Excuse me. So part of what's going to make this happen is the model context protocol. And look, this world moves so quickly. MCP, if anybody who's watched Tron is familiar with MCP, it means something different. This is only a year old, and already it's in the air when you're talking about AI. And what the MCP does is it really exposes tools. Tools are, think of it as a kind of API, but it's an API described with English language descriptions, which now the LLM, because it knows how to understand the English language descriptions, can allow a human or whoever's interacting at the agent level to figure out how to invoke the tool instead of like calling an API. Remember, P is for programmer, right? So instead of, it's not a programming thing, it's a tool exercise thing. And then it can figure out how to do stuff. And it's really amazing what you can do. You plug these MCPs into whatever your agent framework is, into your Claude or your GitHub Copilot, whatever. You plug in your MCPs, and all of a sudden it can show you things and do things. It's very, very powerful, all without having to really do any programming. But it means that now I'm actually programming at a higher level. I can start to build models by creating a set of prompts. So the tool is the primary thing. If you read the specs, it says, look, an MCP is actually a collection of tools, resources, which is like a library of stuff it knows how to cough up, and prompts, which are hints about how to use the tools. This is how this is kind of how at least a piece of the world is holding together. So you'll find that most of the enterprise applications have or are building MCP interfaces, and you'll see some of this coming in the Clio software stack as well. So we've got some experiments running already on how to do that, and I'll show you some examples later on. Not to be outdone by Anthropic, Google invented back in April, so months ago, the A to A protocol, agent to agent. Agent to agent protocol is based on the idea that maybe you want to weave multiple agents together into a master agent, because in some sense, if the agent becomes more specialized, then the AI can be less hallucinatory, right? And the classic example you'll see, I've given you a link here at the bottom, is a travel agent. That maybe there's an agent that's good at booking flights and another agent that's good at booking hotels, and then your trip agent doesn't want to do both. It'll try to book you a flight on Hilton. It could get confused, right? So you have the agent, and it understands then how to talk to these more specialized agents to make a bigger meta agent out of it. And I think there's a lot of merit to this thought. But of course, it's another sort of layer to the complexity of what you're trying to design. So if you're building your little agents, you want to get them as narrow and focused. They do a good job, and you can really concise training, and then weave them together into a higher level solution using A to A protocol. And this is some of the vocabulary. My favorite is the agent card. It's like every agent gets an electronic business card that describes what it does. Again, in English, right? This is the cool thing. The LLMs can understand text, and then it sort of knows then how to weave the solution together because it's described in English that it can kind of understand in its little Skynet brain. So interesting. Um, then I mentioned RAG already, this retrieval augmented generation. And so this is the idea of where, remember I showed you my really super basic slide. You got to train the model on some stuff. Well, I remember when 3 years ago, the word on the street was that ChatGPT knew the state of the internet from 2 years earlier. All right, so it was 2022. It was up to date to 2020. Why? What was that? Well, because of course it takes lots of electricity and lots of GPUs to sort of build out a new model. And sometimes it knows, broad general knowledge. You want to teach it very specific knowledge. And so this retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, is a way to introduce additional information to sort of augment how you're talking to the LLM. And this is sort of a necessary thing to sort of give more context, more scope to what your agent is doing. So now you got to think about what model to use, but also what additional knowledge sources to RAG in. But of course, this world continues to evolve. So now we have, and I guess RAG is just too fun to play with. So now we have CRAG, cache augmented RAG, and graph retrieval. So GRAG. So think of an acronym that ends in RAG, and then somebody's going to come up with one. But you see, this is all recent work that's done this year. And then, again, it's just more efficient ways of figuring out how to train the model beyond what the LLM knows so that it becomes more contextual, more focused on the job at hand. So I like this as well, that if you want to learn now how to do, if you want to learn programming, you can go to Khan Academy, right? It'll teach you Python, whatever. You can talk to ChatGPT, it'll teach you PHP. Great. If you want to learn agentic programming and some of these concepts that I'm talking about here, you can actually go to Anthropic. They have this nice little tutorial, and you can see there's a lot of detail here. How to use the different tools, how to think about training, how to think about even engineering the prompting. That when you build a prompt, it's like a text piece of instruction. Expect this kind of question, produce this kind of output, make it format like this. Here's an example. Here's another example. You can put metadata tags into the instructions. So there's another layer of detail in programming that goes into what looks like it's all, it's going to be easy. It's just text to understand. Say, well, it doesn't, right? You have to actually develop and think about programming this thing with your programmer brain. It's just you're not writing code anymore. You're developing an agentic assembly. So again, this is a good resource if you want to teach yourself. And I thought this is good. This went GA 2 weeks ago. This is Amazon Bedrock. Again, it's the framework that we've been using in Clio. Again, there's an equivalent in Azure and GCP to give you abstraction over the LLM or the small language model, the cheap ones, the SLM, so you can kind of try different things and easily switch out the model by just changing a flag and changing the amount of money that they charge you, because it's Jeff Bezos after all. And they've expanded that now with something they call Agent Core, which adds in all these other tools and a framework for managing all this other stuff. So you have a whole sort of workbench for developing an entire agentic solution, more than just kind of abstracting the training material, the RAGs, and which LLM you're going to use, and including some of the frameworks that you see here. And I've got some other, survey slides that'll help you do that. But don't worry, Azure's got something. I wrote down what they call it. Everybody, I think maybe Azure's got the best, or Amazon's got the best marketing appeal. Agent Core sounds kind of cool. Azure calls it the AI Foundry Agent Service. That's not as punchy to me as Agent Core. GCP calls the Vertex AI Agent Builder. So again, I don't mean to. I pick on Amazon, because we use Amazon. So this is what I'm more immersed in. But it's not an Amazon specific thing. Everybody is providing ways of picking the right LLM or SLM and ways of managing the tool suite, so you have an agent development lifecycle and managing all the resources that help you build your agentic solution. And again, this went beta in July and went GA October 23rd of this year, like 2 weeks ago. So I mean, you gotta you gotta be staying current with this stuff. But it's a lot of fun. So let me give you kind of a specific use case. We're supply chain guys. We have supply chain platform. So what might this look like if you wanted to take something like the CIC integration platform and you build, our customer, you're going to build an order management tool on top of us. So up here, here's CIC. Orders are flowing back and forth. This is you over here with your internal systems. and here are your partners, and whether it's EDIs or APIs or whatever, stuff is flowing back and forth. And eventually, the somewhere in the middle, we call them our SCOs, or supply chain orchestration unit, is going to say, hey, there's an order that's stuck. There's bad data. We don't understand the warehouse number, something or other. So what we want to do is have a way to query that so that your agent here, the pretty little robot, can understand, hey, there's a stuck order, can understand from the description of what we've been able to collect, oh, I understand why that's stuck, because that's not a valid warehouse number. And then we can go maybe use MCP tools and talk to other backend systems, look at the CRM, kind of understand the context of what's going on, and say, wait a second, I know how to fix it. It's a fat finger. We move the warehouse, whatever it is, and then we'll expose a order reprocessing tool that will allow you to tell the CI/CD cloud, you know what, fix the order, send it through. Instead of going all the way back here to the partner, say, no, you got to fix your stuff. Just no, fix the order right here, send it through. We want to take the order today because we know how to fill it. And that decision then can be made maybe with a combination of humans and the context from the backend applications and the detailed information that's actually in the transaction, again, EDI or not, that's flowing through the cloud. So this is the kind of possibility that we think will be unlocked. Similarly, if you're in the shipping business, we think about loads maybe instead of orders. So what if you have and we see people ask for this now, right? Where a load tender comes in and they're asking you if you want to bid on taking the load from the shipper, and you have a certain amount of time to respond. Usually there's a flag in the tender that says, I need an answer in an hour or whatever, or I'm going to bid the load somewhere else. And then we have timers that are looking at that and say, well, you know what? You had an hour and half of the hour is gone. What's going on? So then we could have a different robot that says, well, let's understand when we're getting close to the deadline, and then maybe I can have some kind of agentic solution to decide, yeah, I'm going to accept or reject the load, and then reject it right here, and then synchronize with the TMS later on. So you have a way of kind of augmenting what's happening here. Again, a combination of technology and humans to try to think about a different way of even what, this is just one piece of the puzzle, what the CI/CD cloud is doing for you, right? It's watching all those supply chain interactions with partners, collecting deep contextual information about what's actually in that API or EDI or whatever the format is. And so it knows everything, but then maybe expose tools to allow you to manipulate that stuff agentically instead of manually. So I think this is the shape of the enterprise, the shape of the Clio customer of the future is thinking about, well, what do these things look like agentically? How does the CI/CD cloud itself, what does that look like agentically? So I think that's opens up a lot of opportunity. So just to, I want to throw a bunch of stuff at you. Again, I like to go to LinkedIn because it's filled with people who are selling new stuff. Everybody wants to sell new stuff based on AI. And so you get a non-stop feed of pretty pictures. I like this one because of the animations, because the other Tushars of the world who are spending marketing budget and making pretty pictures about AI, and you get a lot of them. But it is a way to stay current, right? New stuff comes out and people want to talk about it. And so I think this is a productive venue. But you'll see some of these things, like LangChain is a framework that helps you, kind of assemble all the different steps in agentic flow. LangGraph kind of gives you more of a contextual multi-step, kind of a longer running process with context and with human in the loop. These are other kind of tools that you can use to build facades and stuff. So very interesting stuff. One thing to be careful of, I think this is fun too, the AI Darwin Awards. This is a real website. You don't want to show up on this on this website. I don't know if you ever heard, there was a story of the, I think it was Air Canada customer service AI powered robot that was giving discounts that didn't exist or refunds that weren't authorized to customers. And then they had to pull that. So a judge ruled they had to pay because the agent said that the customer was entitled to a refund they weren't really supposed to get. And so they pulled it. But there is an entry here in the AI Darwin Awards for Air Canada for that. But look, this is fun. But don't show up here. So, be careful. And so be cautious, especially as you're rolling out kind of automated decision making. Look for those human in the loop technologies. Again, the tool suite's evolving. We can do better training. We can figure out how to use evals from our AI checking the AI so that we can get human approval. So, think about the whole ecosystem. I mean, it's the same amount of work, conceptual, developmental, intellectual work as it is to build software. So you can build more faster out of bigger, fancier parts. But yeah, don't show up here. But go here. It is fun to read, and when you want to have a laugh on a Friday night. We got this from one of our board members, just to say, well, here's all the stuff, and there'll be a quiz at 2 o'clock. No, but there's just so much going on. My favorite part that I noticed here, because you can tell I read the whole thing, is that number 2 and number 100 are the same. It just one is labeled as a chatbot, the other as a conversational assistant. So yeah, it beats me. But there's a lot of stuff. I was out in San Francisco recently driving the freeways, and just every billboard is something AI, something AI, something AI. So look, I'm not sure it's a bubble, but there's certainly a reality to it. So we need to be aware. So keep your mind open, challenge what you think you know, because it's a constantly changing landscape, right? I've showed you 3 new things. One of them is 2 weeks old. Even the MCP thing, which is foundational now, is just exactly a year old. I mean, it's incredible, the pace of change. So challenge your assumptions, continuous learning. We talk about a dual track methodology, that we need to have. We have an engine that builds software and gets features in customers' hands. Now we have a more explicit second engine that's doing research and experimentation that then can dribble things that pass muster into the engine. So we've got these 2 different engines. I think we all need to think about how you can't just read, you have to do. You got to get your dirt under your fingernails with this technology before you can see and believe that it can go into your main delivery pipeline. And again, look, we're selling technology. We're also building technology internally. So it could just be potato chip factory stuff. You do experimentation, figure out what to do. Be cautious of free, because there's a quid pro quo. And somebody had that famous quote, right? If you're not paying for something, then you're the product. If you're not paying for a product, then you're the product, right? So it's a little bit that way. If you're not paying for it, then the data that you're giving is in fact the product. Focus on getting your hands on data. I put an asterisk on data because keep in mind that one of the things that AI is pretty good at is understanding unstructured data. So that's gotten pretty rigorous. We used to say, oh, it's a PDF, I can't understand it, or we have to do OCR. A lot of that stuff has gotten a lot better. So you can have a broader scope of data, but go get the data and get into an automated pipeline. Don't assume that because it's an email, because it's something unstructured, that's got to be handled by a human. Maybe human assisted, but you can do automation. But go get some data and automate, or you don't have enough of a machinery to build an AI solution on top. Think about AI as a core competency across your business. I don't really believe in an AI department. I don't think an AI innovation lab works because it's pervasive. I need everybody to be thinking about AI, right? Little AI tools you're using in the desktop helps you improve your grammar. I don't know. We're at work. We're not writing essays to submit to be graded. And so everybody is going to be thinking about AI. So you need some way of socializing and evangelizing AI across the enterprise. But every single job function should be touched somehow by what the AI is doing. And then lastly, demand AI readiness from your tools. If you're purchasing software, there's got to be a reason why when you go through your next tech refresh, that it's obviously part of your AI agentic framework kind of solution. So you're going to get pressured to do stuff differently with AI. You got to pass that pressure down your software and technology supply chain to build it out. So, given that, I'd like to take a few questions, but hopefully this is a lesson that I want to impart and look for more and more kind of cool agentic AI stuff coming in our technology solution. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Fantastic. A lot of great insights there. I think there's just a lot of different components to thinking about your AI strategy that I think you were able to outline. I do have a few questions that have come in. Folks, this is your prompt to enter any questions that you have. We have a few questions already, so stick around. I think you'll learn a little bit. So I'm going to start with the first question, and not in any particular order, just the first question that I think is most relevant. And the question came over here, and I got another screen. I've got them all open on here. So, are there safeguards to prevent the model from executing unattended commands or revealing internal logic?
Yeah, so I think those are different questions, right? So one of the threat vectors that we see is something called prompt injection, where if you expose kind of a chat interface, and this is part of maybe what happened with the Air Canada situation, because remember you've got the core based LLM, and then you're feeding it instructions, and then you're exposing this pre-instructed kind of chatbot to an end user to ask things, and they can begin to inject additional instructions that kind of corrupt your basic input. And so I think part of the solution is to combine things, to pre-filter the questions people are asking, to narrow the scope of what that chatbot is doing, so you can kind of control that particular threat vector. In terms of the data that you disclose to the LLM, a lot of this is just contractual. This is where I'm like, be wary of free. Understand the contractual relationship, the obligations that your language model provider is giving you, depending on the type of license you have with them. So you need to have a contract in place, right? You have to scrutinize that to make sure that the data is not going to get absorbed and then used inappropriately. But then finally, I think the concept of an eval, to be looking at the answers that come back from the agent, and then have a sort of independently configured surveyor to look for things. I don't think a classic DLP kind of solution is going to work here, but to have an eval that is trained to look for inappropriate kind of disclosure or responses, and then to filter those out. I think it'll be part of the solution, and that's part of where some of those frameworks help you weave together different tools in different stages, so that you can actually sort of program that orchestration as part of your overall agentic solution.
Awesome. Another one, can the model be tricked into ignoring system instructions or leaking sensitive information?
Well, yeah, it's a very similar question. I think the models can be tricked, which, and again, it's really all along that same vein of the prompt injection threat, and so some of that is, look, you don't necessarily have to imagine that the agentic solution that you're deploying is a raw input chat box like ChatGPT that then you talk to and make it do stuff. It may be a different, there's pre-filtering going on with the questions you're asking that is powered so that, it's constrained, it's embedded technology. It isn't raw agent chat. And so I think that's how you have to imagine it. Because a lot of the funny and frightening stories we heard are really people just talking to ChatGPT, and you can make it do stuff, and it gives, poor advice for people with mental health issues and all kinds of, bad stories and funny stories. But I don't think that's how it's going to work in the enterprise. You're not just sitting at ChatGPT typing stuff. You're sitting in an agent that you've built, or an application that you've built that sits on top of the agent, right? We're using AI, generative AI powered solutions that are just part of like how we do rendering. It's not even conversational. It's just a way of understanding variable pieces of data so we can render them, and then they make sense in our UX. They're completely embedded. And then I'm going to have really good control over any kind of inappropriate behavior or disclosure risks, right? And plus, then we tend to use very small models. So yeah, you're right to be concerned about it, but I think there are approaches, and go slowly in stages. Don't start with this giant agent, ask everything. Narrow the scope of those agents. Think about maybe an A-to-A assembly to limit the scope of what the agents can do.
And this is a follow-on to the last one, so I'm going to ask this question before I go on to the other ones. How do we monitor for anomalous prompt behavior over time? Are there some monitoring tools there, John? Can you have an LLM for an LLM?
Yeah,
Right?
of course. I mean, and that's kind of what the eval is, right? Yes, you can be collecting your inputs and outputs, and then you can subject them to either real-time training and analysis, which is really what an eval is like real-time in loop kind of evaluation of the response. I think I don't have a tool at the top of mind for doing this. I think this kind of thing will continue to evolve.
Yeah.
We have a huge suite of focused different security scanners, security applications. I think we're going to start to see more security and compliance focused surveillance tools show up in the conversational landscape. But I think we can do it now, but you'd be building it with you would build an agent to watch the agents, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. So, a couple of other questions that came in. How does a business responsibly encourage AI experimentation without causing chaos?
Hmm.
And kind of where do you draw the line, right? Where do you draw the line for allowing people to go and experiment versus not?
Well, so I think part of it is classic change management. But again, I want you to challenge your conventional thinking on these kinds of things. Um, just because it's meant to be evolutionary, revolutionary. I don't know, but you can't abdicate the responsibilities for doing your day job, right? Right. So I think it's how you describe what people are meant to do. You can't just stop doing what you're doing. The shape of your business isn't going to overnight, dissolve and reform like a phoenix in a different shape. Um, so I think you have to put, some scope on how you're doing um, experimentation and what happens to the legacy stuff. It doesn't just go away, right? That's why I describe it as a dual track. We have a very rigorous machine for how software gets approved and released, whether it's towards the internal IS side or out to the product side, because those are real production capabilities, and then the data matters and the security matters and all of that matters. And then when we're doing experimentation, we have a separate Amazon account. We have different things to experiment. You can't do it on real data. But then there's budgeting for how much of this you can do that feeds into how much of this you can do.
Yeah.
So we've kind of fenced it in both in terms of like a data security perimeter, but also a budgeting perimeter. We budgeted how much you're allowed to even to spend. If you go rogue, you can spend $50,000 in a day, just because you picked the wrong model and ran too much data through it. So you want controls there. And again, you can get that from your LLM provider. You can set quotas where it stops. And so I think you have to manage the budget. You have to manage the time. And then you have to manage your rhythm. So just because it's an experiment doesn't mean that it automatically goes out. There's another stage gate where it then gets professionalized, right? This is how we're trying to operate, because
Yeah.
we want to innovate, but I can't break the machine, right?
Yeah.
Now a year from now, the machine will be a lot different from the way the machine was, because all these new parts are going to drop in, but they went in through a rigorous process. And depending on the business you're in, you may have very strict change control processes for things that go into your internal manufacturing process or whatever.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is a question which may be more of a product question. Not very clear, but how can you prevent information from leaking from customer to customer in a cloud situation, right? When everything is kind of hosted. How does Clio think about that, and how do you recommend other organizations think about that?
Yeah, so if you're building so it's a tenancy question, right? How do you separate tenants from each other? And we use different technical controls to do that. In our model, we have very rigorous tenant separation. There are certain kinds of businesses where data is separate, but then tenants can cross-pollinate to each other. Like you see this in SharePoint. SharePoint in general is like, well, it belongs to our company, and but then I can kind of share a folder with another company.
Mm,
And then things start to get complicated. Okay, well, how's that going to work? And so they worked it out, but that's a harder problem to solve. If you have very strict tenant boundaries, then we just have to we build it in stripes. And so every infrastructure where data gets stored, how does the key management work? How's the tenant separation work? How does the noisy neighbor? How are resources controlled? You see it in Salesforce. Salesforce has this governor limits in force.com to control resource consumption, and everything lives in strict data silos. So I think there's no one answer, because it's going to depend on your entire infrastructure stack, because you have to worry about not only data security but also resource consumption and like this noisy neighbor. Like if one customer's chewing up a lot of CPU, do other customers get slow? Right.
mm.
This is where like the Salesforce governor limits kick in, and we've got some approaches for managing that in different pieces of our infrastructure in different ways, resource pooling, this kind of thing. Right. So
Perfect.
yeah, there's no easy answer, but it's a great question. If that's the shape of your business, yeah, that's something you got to think about.
Yep. Well, John, I appreciate the time, and I'm sure everybody else does as well. I know there's a few questions here that we weren't able to get to, but we are up on time, and I want to be respectful of our audience, giving us 45 minutes of their day here today, and as well as you, John, giving us 45 minutes of your day. So thank you so much. Um, as I mentioned early on at the beginning of the webinar, if you weren't there at the beginning, we will be sharing this recording. And again, if you have any questions, shooting them over. I think most of you received this webinar invite from Jill Barlow. That's probably where the invite came from in terms of the email address and the person. Shoot her any questions that you have that you may not have gotten in here, and we will get back to you and we will follow up. So thanks again so much for your time, everybody, and happy AI experimenting. Just make sure you put some controls around it. All right. Thanks a lot, John. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.